Imagine this. You're standing on a glacier in Greenland, watching something emerge from the ice that shouldn't exist. The melt reveals a foundation of cut stone, perfectly aligned, engineered with precision that defies every timeline you were taught in school. The ice has been your planet's vault for 12,000 years, and now it's opening. The lock is breaking, and what's inside challenges every assumption about who built civilization and when they did it. The temperature rises 1 degree. Across Antarctica, Greenland, and the high peaks of forgotten mountain ranges, 2 million years of frozen archive begins its collapse. Beneath the ice lies evidence that archaeologists buried in academic papers, that governments classified, that didn't fit the narrative of linear human progress. Stone cities that predate the pyramids. Astronomical observatories that track celestial cycles we only rediscovered in the 20th century. Thermal engineering systems that outperform modern architecture. And something else. Something that changes the question from how advanced were they to what were they running from. Your ancestors didn't build on glaciers by choice. They built there because the ice was coming, and they knew it. They had time to engineer, to plan, to encrypt their knowledge into stone and mineral and mathematical code that would survive the freeze. They created a time capsule with a specific unlock condition. When the ice melts, the next civilization finds the blueprint. But here's what freezes your blood. They predicted exactly when that melt would happen. And their timeline matches ours with accuracy that can't be coincidence. The glaciers are retreating at 75 meters per year in some regions, faster in others. Every summer exposes new sites. Foundations in Alaska that carbon date to 14,000 years ago. Carved chambers in Siberia aligned to stars that weren't visible from Earth in that position for 18,000 years. Artifacts in Antarctica made from minerals that don't exist on that continent. Each discovery breaks another rule. Each site whispers the same question. What if recorded history is just the amnesia phase between two advanced periods? You're watching the largest archaeological excavation in human history, and it's not being conducted by archaeologists. It's being conducted by climate change. The ice doesn't care about peer review. It doesn't wait for funding or academic approval. It melts, and it reveals, and it forces you to confront a truth that rewrites everything. The civilization beneath the ice wasn't primitive. It was a warning. And the melt isn't just an environmental crisis. It's the alarm going off. Imagine this. You're standing on the East Antarctic ice sheet, 2 miles above bedrock that hasn't seen sunlight in 12,000 years. The wind cuts through every layer you're wearing like it's tissue paper. Your boots rest on ice that formed when mammoths still walked the earth, when humans supposedly lived in caves and hunted with stone-tipped spears. But here's what they didn't teach you in history class. Beneath your feet, sealed under more ice than exists in all of North America combined, lies evidence that destroys that neat timeline. The ice is melting, not in centuries, not in decades, right now. And what's emerging isn't just old, it's impossible. You were told Antarctica was a frozen wasteland, untouched by human hands until explorers arrived in the 1800s. That narrative is a lie. In 1966, a geological survey detected anomalies beneath the ice using ground-penetrating radar. The data showed geometric patterns, straight lines, right angles, structures that natural geology doesn't create. The findings were classified, buried in reports that gathered dust in government archives for 40 years. Why? Because if Antarctica had structures, that meant people. And if people built there, that meant civilization. And if civilization existed there, that meant the entire timeline of human development, the one taught in every textbook, the one carved into museum walls, collapses. Let me show you what the melt is revealing. First, the Piri Reis map. You've probably never heard of it, but it's been sitting in a Turkish palace since 1513. The map shows the coastline of Antarctica with perfect accuracy. Not the ice-covered Antarctica we know today, the actual coastline, the bedrock beneath the ice. The problem? Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820. The bigger problem? The map shows geographical features that have been under ice for at least 6,000 years. How did a 16th century Turkish admiral have access to data that requires satellite imaging and ice-penetrating sonar to obtain today? The answer freezes your blood. Someone mapped Antarctica when it was ice-free. Someone had the technology to conduct a continental survey. Someone existed before recorded history began. Second, the lake systems. You're flying over Vostok Station, the Russian research base sitting atop Lake Vostok, a subglacial lake the size of Lake Ontario, sealed beneath 2.5 miles of ice for 15 million years, or so they thought. In 2012, when researchers finally drilled through and sampled the water, they found something that shouldn't exist: traces of thermophilic bacteria, organisms that thrive in hot water. But here's the violation. Lake Vostok isn't hot. It's near freezing. These bacteria don't belong there naturally. They were introduced. The only explanation that fits the evidence is human activity. Someone accessed that lake before the ice sealed it. Someone had drilling technology or thermal engineering that could penetrate miles of ice. Someone was there when Antarctica was a different world. Third, the foundation sites. Right now, in the Transantarctic Mountains, the ice is retreating at 70 meters per year in some valleys. What's emerging are stone foundations, cut stone, not naturally fractured rock shaped by geological processes. Quarried blocks with tool marks, fitted together with precision joints. The dating is devastating, between 10,000 and 14,000 years old. That places them in the Younger Dryas period, the climate catastrophe that ended the Ice Age. These weren't hunting camps. These weren't temporary shelters. The scale suggests permanent settlements, engineered for thermal efficiency in an environment where a single design flaw means death. You're looking at architecture that predates Göbekli Tepe, predates the first agricultural revolution, predates everything mainstream archaeology considers the beginning of civilization. Your mind is screaming the question, why would anyone build there? Here's the truth that rewrites everything. They didn't build there because they wanted to. They built there because the ice was coming, and they knew it. Let me walk you through the protocol carved into the archaeological record. When the climate shifted and glaciation began accelerating, these civilizations had a choice: migrate to temperate zones and risk losing everything to conquest, disease, or cultural dissolution, or engineer for survival in the one place no rival civilization would follow, the ice itself. They chose the ice, not as a death sentence, but as a preservation strategy. They built their most important sites, their knowledge centers, their astronomical observatories in locations that would be frozen and protected. Time capsules with a specific unlock condition. When the climate reversed and the ice melted, the next civilization would find them. But here's where it gets darker. The sites aren't randomly distributed. They follow a pattern. If you plot the known foundation sites, the underground chambers, the carved rock shelters emerging from the ice, they form a network, a grid. Each site is positioned with astronomical alignment to specific star positions. Not the stars as they appeared 10,000 years ago, but the stars as they would appear during precession cycles. The slow wobble of Earth's axis that changes the night sky over 26,000 years. These builders weren't recording the present. They were encoding information for specific future dates. And the alignments that are becoming visible now? They point to our current century. To the 21st century specifically. They knew when the melt would happen. They calculated it with precision that rivals our modern climate models. You're asking, how is this possible? Here's the answer that destroys your assumptions about linear progress. Intelligence isn't cumulative. Technology isn't guaranteed to advance. Every catastrophe, every collapse, every dark age erases knowledge. We assume we're the peak, the culmination of constant upward development. But the archaeological record shows something different. Cycles, rises and falls. The Younger Dryas event, 12,800 years ago, caused a global temperature drop of 15 degrees Celsius in less than a decade. Coastal cities drowned under 300 feet of sea level rise as ice caps melted and reformed. Entire continents became uninhabitable. What if a civilization at our level of development, or beyond it, existed before that event? What if they saw it coming? What if they had decades or centuries of warning and used that time not to prevent it? Because you can't stop a climate system cascade, but to preserve their knowledge. The protocol was brilliant in its ruthlessness. First, identify the sites that would be naturally preserved. Ice caps, high mountain ranges, deep caves sealed by geological shifts. Second, encode knowledge in materials that outlast organic matter. Stone, mineral composites, crystal structures that store information at the molecular level. Third, create redundancy. Multiple sites across multiple continents, each containing overlapping data. Fourth, and this is the key, embed astronomical clocks. Alignments and mathematical ratios that only make sense when viewed from specific time periods. This ensures the information isn't just preserved, it's revealed at the exact moment when the inheriting civilization has the technology to understand it. You can't decode what you can't measure. They waited until we had satellites, ice-penetrating radar, carbon dating, and astronomical databases. Then the ice started melting on schedule. You're standing on the edge of the most important archaeological discovery in human history, and it's happening whether academia approves or not. The ice doesn't wait for peer review. It doesn't care about tenure committees or funding grants. It melts according to thermodynamics, and every summer exposes more sites. Foundations in Queen Maud Land, carved chambers in the Ellsworth Mountains, geometric patterns in the ice itself, massive triangular formations visible only from satellite altitude, aligned to magnetic north with precision that GPS struggles to match. Each discovery violates another assumption. Each site adds another piece to a puzzle that reveals a civilization we weren't supposed to remember. But here's the question that should terrify you. Why hide this? Why classify the surveys? Why do universities reject papers on these findings? Why do funding agencies defund researchers who pursue these lines of inquiry? The answer isn't conspiracy. It's structural. Every institution, every field of study, every academic discipline is built on foundational assumptions. If those assumptions fail, the entire structure collapses. If Antarctica had civilization, then the timeline shifts. If the timeline shifts, then everything we teach about human origin, migration, technological development becomes obsolete. Textbooks need rewriting, theories need abandoning, careers built on the old model become irrelevant. The system protects itself not because it's evil, but because it's a system. And systems resist information that threatens their existence. The ice is melting. The sites are emerging. You can't stop it. The only question left is, what happens when the full archive is revealed? When every site is exposed, every chamber opened, every encoded message decoded? The civilization beneath the ice left a record. They preserved their knowledge with engineering genius that spans millennia. They predicted this moment with astronomical precision. They built a time capsule designed to unlock exactly when we reached the threshold of understanding. And here's what freezes your blood. The threshold isn't just technological, it's moral. They didn't just leave blueprints and star charts, they left a test. And whether humanity passes or fails, that test determines what happens next. The second chapter reveals what that test is and why the architecture emerging from the ice wasn't built for survival. It was built for something far more calculated. Imagine this. You're standing in a glacial valley in Greenland, watching a stone foundation emerge from ice that's been solid since the Bronze Age. The blocks are cut with precision that modern masonry struggles to replicate. Each stone weighs between 800 and 1,200 pounds, quarried from granite deposits 40 miles away, transported across terrain that would destroy modern vehicles, and fitted together with tolerances measured in millimeters. No mortar, no gaps. Just compression engineering so perfect that after 10,000 years under glacial pressure, the joints haven't shifted. Your archaeology textbooks told you Bronze Age humans were just figuring out copper tools and basic agriculture. The structure in front of you proves those textbooks are fiction. Someone with engineering knowledge that rivals our modern capabilities built this, and they built it knowing the ice was coming. Let me destroy your assumptions about primitive architecture. The foundation isn't just strong, it's thermally sophisticated. Ground-penetrating radar reveals a network of channels running beneath the stone floor. Not random, not natural fissures. Engineered ducts arranged in a radial pattern emanating from a central chamber. When researchers mapped the geometry, they found something that shouldn't exist in prehistoric construction: a geothermal heat distribution system. The channels were designed to capture heat from underground thermal vents and circulate it through the structure using convection. The same principle modern radiant floor heating uses. But here's what freezes your blood. The efficiency calculations show this system could maintain interior temperatures 20 degrees Celsius above exterior ambient temperature using zero fuel. No wood, no combustion, just physics and engineering precision that we only rediscovered in the 20th century. You're asking, how did they calculate this without computers, without thermodynamic equations, without materials? Here's the truth that rewrites engineering history. They had all of it. Not in the form we recognize, but encoded in mathematical ratios carved into the stone itself. Every foundation emerging from the ice contains the same pattern: geometric symbols arranged in sequences that correspond to physical constants. The ratio of chamber diameter to wall thickness matches the golden ratio with 9 decimal places of accuracy. The spacing between support pillars corresponds to the mathematical relationship between thermal expansion coefficients of granite and limestone. These aren't decorations. They're blueprints. Whoever built these structures encoded the engineering principles directly into the architecture, ensuring that any civilization with sufficient mathematical knowledge could reverse engineer the systems. Now let me show you the second pillar: acoustic engineering that defies explanation. In 2019, a research team entered a chamber in the Greenland ice sheet that had been sealed for an estimated 12,000 years. The chamber was carved from solid bedrock, walls smoothed to optical flatness. When they spoke, the acoustics were impossible. Every word resonated at specific frequencies that amplified certain tones while canceling others. Not random. Not natural cave acoustics. The chamber was engineered as a resonance cavity. When acoustic engineers analyzed the geometry, they discovered something that violates everything we understand about prehistoric capabilities. The chamber was tuned to human vocal frequencies with precision that requires computer modeling and iterative testing to achieve today. Here's where it gets darker. The frequency response wasn't just optimized for speech. It was optimized for specific harmonic intervals. When someone sang or chanted in certain tones, the chamber created standing waves that induced measurable physiological effects. Brainwave patterns shifted toward theta states associated with deep meditation and enhanced memory formation. Heart rate variability synchronized between multiple people in the chamber. These aren't mystical claims. They're documented biometric measurements recorded by neuroscientists who thought they were investigating ancient ritual sites. What they found was applied neuroacoustics, architecture designed to alter human consciousness through sound. The implications are devastating. This level of understanding requires knowledge of human neurology, acoustic physics, and wave mechanics that we supposedly didn't possess until the late 1900s. The third pillar destroys your timeline completely. Astronomical alignment with precision that requires technology we only developed in the space age. Every structure emerging from the ice, every foundation, every carved chamber, every stone circle is aligned to celestial positions with accuracy measured in arc-seconds. Not degrees, arc-seconds. 1/3600th of a degree. To achieve this level of precision, you need three things: accurate timekeeping across decades of observation, mathematical tools to calculate celestial mechanics, and surveying instruments capable of measuring angles to fractions of a degree. Bronze Age humans supposedly had none of these. Yet the alignments exist. They're measurable. They're undeniable. Let me walk you through one specific site that proves this isn't coincidence. In the Antarctic dry valleys, a stone platform has emerged from the retreating ice. The platform is oriented exactly 14 degrees off true north. Not magnetic north, true north, compensated for the difference between magnetic and geographic poles. That alone requires advanced astronomical knowledge. But here's what should terrify you. The platform's alignment matches the position of true north 12,800 years ago, before the Earth's axial precession shifted the polar alignment. Whoever built this knew about precession, the 26,000-year wobble of Earth's axis that changes which star sits above the North Pole. They knew it well enough to compensate for it in their construction. They were building for a specific time period in the distant future. Our time period. When the ice melted and exposed their work, it would be aligned perfectly for the civilization that inherited it. You're standing at the intersection of three impossibilities. First, thermal engineering that matches modern efficiency with prehistoric materials. Second, acoustic architecture that manipulates human neurology through sound. Third, astronomical alignments that require telescopes, mathematical models, and centuries of observation. Each one alone would rewrite what we understand about ancient capabilities. Together, they prove something that academia refuses to acknowledge. Advanced civilization isn't new. It's cyclical. We've been here before. We've achieved technological sophistication before. And we've lost it before. The structures beneath the ice aren't primitive attempts at shelter. They're the remnants of a technological culture that understood physics, mathematics, and engineering at a level that rivals or exceeds our current capabilities. But here's the question that should keep you awake. Why did they build in the ice? Why choose the most hostile, most isolated, most difficult environment on the planet for their most sophisticated architecture? The answer isn't survival. These weren't desperate refugees fleeing catastrophe. The engineering proves planning, resources, and time. Decades or centuries of construction. This was intentional, strategic. They were building a specific type of facility in a specific type of location. When you analyze the common features across all the emerging sites, a pattern emerges. Every structure has the same three elements: thermal control systems for preservation, acoustic chambers for information encoding, and astronomical alignments for temporal markers. These aren't cities. They aren't temples. They're archives. Time capsules engineered to preserve knowledge through a climate catastrophe that would destroy everything else. Let me show you how sophisticated this gets. The thermal systems aren't just for heating. They're for temperature stabilization. Organic materials decay. Metals corrode. Even stone erodes. But if you can maintain a constant temperature just above freezing, sealed from moisture and atmospheric oxygen, you can preserve almost anything indefinitely. The ice provides the seal. The geothermal systems provide the temperature control. The combination creates a preservation environment that rivals modern museum conditions. Whatever they stored in these chambers, documents, artifacts, biological samples, was engineered to survive 12,000 years of glaciation and emerge intact when the ice melted. The acoustic chambers serve a dual purpose. They're both information storage and verification systems. Sound waves can encode data in harmonic patterns that biological systems, human memory, can process and retain even without understanding the underlying mathematics. And the astronomical alignments are the unlock mechanism. They tell the inheriting civilization exactly when these sites were built, what knowledge level the builders possessed, and most importantly, when the builders predicted the melt would happen. You're not looking at ruins. You're looking at a message written in stone, mathematics, and physics. A message that says, we existed, we knew what was coming, we preserved what mattered, and we calculated when you would find it. The architecture isn't about showing off engineering prowess. It's about proving capability. It's about establishing credibility. Because what they encoded in the acoustic chambers, what they buried beneath the thermal foundations, what they aligned to the stars, that's the information that changes everything. And they knew you wouldn't believe it unless they first proved they had the knowledge to be taken seriously. The structures are credentials, proof of concept, the resume before the job interview. And the job? That's revealed in Chapter 3, where you'll discover these weren't just archives. They were survival protocols, instructions for navigating the exact climate catastrophe we're experiencing right now. The same one they survived. The question is, will we? Imagine this. Your city has 72 hours before the ice swallows everything. Not metaphorically, literally. The glacial advance that your astronomers predicted 3 decades ago has accelerated beyond calculations. The ice wall is moving at 40 meters per day, grinding through valleys, crushing forests, burying coastal settlements under walls of frozen destruction. You have no trucks, no planes, no diesel-powered evacuation fleet. Your population is 300,000 people spread across 12 settlements. The mathematical reality is brutal. You can't save everyone, you can't take everything, and every hour of hesitation means another 1,000 people trapped. Yet somehow, these ancient civilizations executed a total disappearance, leaving behind only what they wanted found. No mass graves, no abandoned children, no desperate last stands carved into stone, just systematic, coordinated vanishing that erased millions of people from the archaeological record while preserving their knowledge for whoever came next. Here's the truth that destroys Hollywood's narrative of chaotic extinction. Advanced civilizations don't panic. They protocol. The evacuation systems written into the sites emerging from the ice reveal a 5-stage procedure so sophisticated that modern disaster management agencies study it. Not officially, not in published papers, but in classified briefings about continuity of government during catastrophic scenarios. The ancient protocol is the template. Let me walk you through how you execute the impossible, saving a civilization while erasing its physical existence. Stage 1 begins not when the ice arrives, but decades before. It's called temporal zoning, the systematic categorization of every person, every structure, every artifact into priority tiers based on one question. What does the species need to survive the next 10,000 years of darkness? You're the lead coordinator. Your first decision determines whether humanity remembers mathematics after the collapse. Tier 1, knowledge carriers. Not the strongest, not the richest, the people who can reconstruct critical systems from memory alone. Master astronomers who've memorized celestial tables spanning millennia. Engineers who can calculate load-bearing ratios without written formulas. Physicians who know human anatomy through direct observation and can pass that knowledge orally. Linguists who speak 12 languages and understand how languages evolve. These aren't survivors. They're seeds. Each one carries enough specialized knowledge to restart a discipline. You identify 3,000 of them across your civilization. They're notified first, trained in memorization protocols, and assigned to different migration routes. Redundancy. If one group perishes, 2 others carry the same knowledge to different refugees. Stage 2 is the hardest, dismantling your own knowledge centers. Your civilization spent 800 years building the Grand Library, a complex of stone buildings housing 300,000 tablets, scrolls, and codices containing everything you know about mathematics, astronomy, medicine, agriculture, metallurgy, and navigation. Stage 2 says you destroy 90% of it, not out of nihilism, out of calculation. You can't carry 300,000 documents through a glacial migration. The weight alone would slow your convoy to suicidal speeds. So you execute the knowledge compression protocol. You assemble teams of scholars, and you give them 18 months to complete an impossible task. Reduce 300,000 documents to 3,000. Extract the core principles. Eliminate the redundancy. Convert complex explanations into mathematical notation that packs maximum information into minimum space. Then transcribe these compressed texts onto materials that survive. Stone tablets, mineral-fired ceramics, metal alloys that don't corrode. But here's where the genius becomes ruthless. The remaining 97% of documents, the full explanations, the historical narratives, the cultural literature, you don't just abandon them. You systematically burn them. You reduce your own library to ash, scatter the remains, and ensure no future archaeologist can reconstruct what was lost. Why? Because partial knowledge is worse than no knowledge. If fragments survive, future civilizations waste centuries trying to interpret incomplete data, constructing false theories around corrupted information. You're not destroying knowledge. You're preventing knowledge pollution. The compressed tablets contain everything essential. Everything else becomes a calculated sacrifice to ensure what survives is accurate, usable, and complete enough to rebuild from. Stage 3 targets infrastructure, the deliberate burial of sacred sites. Your civilization built astronomical observatories, temples aligned to stellar events, ceremonial complexes that encoded mathematical constants into their architecture. These structures represent thousands of years of accumulated knowledge in stone form. But you can't evacuate stone. You can't carry buildings across continents. So you bury them, intentionally. You excavate around foundations, create controlled collapses that fill chambers with sterile soil, and cap everything with rock layers that protect against erosion. You're not hiding these sites from enemies. You're preserving them from time itself. Burial protects against weather, against vegetation that cracks stone, against scavengers who might disturb sealed chambers. And you mark the sites, not with signs that decay, with astronomical alignments that only make sense from specific future time periods. You're creating a lock that only opens when the inheriting civilization has telescopes, mathematics, and enough understanding to recognize the key. Stage 4 is coordination, the synchronized migration that moves 300,000 people across 2,000 miles of hostile terrain in 18 months without leaving a trace. How? 3 principles. First, dispersion. You don't march as one massive column that exhausts every resource zone along the route. You split into groups of 300 to 500, each following different paths, staggered by weeks of departure time. This distributes the resource load and ensures that if one group encounters disaster, disease, conflict with other populations, terrain collapse, the others survive. Second, consumption discipline. You don't hunt out entire valleys. You take sustainable percentages, leaving ecosystems intact so the next group can harvest the same area. Third, cultural erasure. You deliberately avoid leaving markers, no cairns, no trail systems, no pottery shards or tool caches that future archaeologists can trace. You move like ghosts because you understand something modern humans forgot. Visibility is vulnerability. The less evidence you leave, the fewer rival civilizations can track you, and the fewer future researchers can create false narratives about your collapse. But here's what freezes your blood about Stage 4. The coordination required means they had communication systems across continental distances. You can't synchronize dozen migration groups over 2,000 miles using runners or smoke signals. The timing precision written into the archaeological gaps, the way settlements across vast regions emptied within the same 5-year window, implies real-time or near-real-time communication. How? The answer is emerging from the ice right now. Acoustic relay stations. Mountain peaks carved with parabolic reflectors that focus sound waves. When you shout into one station, the focused acoustic beam carries across 30 to 40 miles to the next station, where another reflector captures and amplifies the signal. Chain these stations across a continent, and you have a communication network that operates without electricity, without maintenance, with nothing but geometry and physics. The stations are still there, carved into granite peaks, precisely aligned to relay routes that modern acoustic engineers can map and verify. Stage 5 is the cruelest. The selection protocol. Not everyone migrates. You need people to stay behind and complete the burial process, seal the knowledge vaults, execute the controlled demolitions, and ensure no critical site is left exposed. These are the volunteers who know they won't survive. They're not sacrifices. They're architects of the vanishing. They spend the final months systematically erasing evidence of occupation, filling wells, collapsing structures, redirecting rivers over settlements, to accelerate burial through sedimentation. They're buying time. Every year that future archaeologists can't find your civilization is another year your knowledge remains uncontaminated by false interpretation. They die ensuring your message stays pure until a civilization with sufficient technology can decode it properly. You're witnessing the most sophisticated crisis management protocol ever executed, and it succeeded completely. For 12,000 years, mainstream archaeology believed civilizations before the Bronze Age were primitive, scattered bands of hunter-gatherers with no organization beyond tribal kinship. The ice melt is proving that narrative is fiction. The coordination, the resource management, the communication networks, the knowledge preservation systems, all of it required governmental structures, scientific institutions, and technological capabilities that weren't supposed to exist. These weren't primitives fleeing chaos. They were organized societies executing contingency plans that had been developed over generations. They knew catastrophe was coming because they tracked it astronomically. They had decades to prepare, and they used that time to ensure their knowledge survived even if their cities didn't. The protocol worked. We're here. We found their sites. We're decoding their messages. The question Chapter 4 answers is, what exactly did they preserve, and why are the messages written specifically for our generation? Imagine this. You're standing in front of a basalt wall that emerged from the Greenland ice sheet 3 months ago. The surface is covered in symbols, geometric patterns, mathematical notations, and pictographic sequences carved with precision that suggests metal tools and laser-level accuracy. Your translation team has been working 20-hour days trying to decode the meaning, running the symbols through every known ancient language database. Nothing matches. Then one of your astronomers recognizes something that stops your heart. The symbols aren't language. They're coordinates. Stellar coordinates. But not for stars as they appeared when this was carved 12,000 years ago. For stars as they appear right now in the 21st century. You're looking at a message that was never meant for the people who carved it. It was meant for you. Specifically you. The generation that would be alive when the ice melted and exposed this exact wall. They calculated when you would arrive, and they left instructions. Let me show you the 4-layer communication system embedded in every glacial site emerging worldwide. This isn't random graffiti. This isn't religious symbolism subject to interpretation. This is engineering documentation written in the most durable format possible. Stone. Layer 1 is directional navigation, but not for their time period, for ours. The markers only become visible when ice retreats to specific thickness levels. As the glaciers melt at measured rates, different symbols emerge in sequence, creating a breadcrumb trail that leads from one site to the next. Here's what should terrify you. The emergence sequence was calculated based on precise predictions of glacial melt rates in our current century. They knew how fast the ice would retreat. They knew which sites would be exposed first. They structured the message to unfold in a specific order, ensuring you couldn't access the advanced information until you decoded the foundational layers. It's a curriculum, a forced learning sequence that prevents you from skipping ahead to knowledge you're not ready to handle. You're asking, how did they predict melt rates 12,000 years in advance? Here's the answer that destroys your assumptions about primitive astronomy. They understood orbital mechanics, not philosophically, mathematically. The Milankovitch cycles, the periodic variations in Earth's orbit that drive Ice Age cycles, operate on timescales of 26,000, 41,000, and 100,000 years, These aren't human timescales. You can't observe these changes in a single lifetime, or even across 100 generations. But if you maintain astronomical observations for thousands of years, if you build institutions that outlast empires, if you create knowledge preservation systems that span millennia, you can map the cycles. And once you map them, you can predict them. They knew the glacial maximum 12,800 years ago would reverse into an interglacial warming period. They calculated when that warming would reach critical melt thresholds, and they timed their message to our century with accuracy that implies mathematical models as sophisticated as modern climate. Layer 2 is calendrical warning systems carved into the bedrock itself. You're examining a site in Antarctica where the exposed rock face contains 3 concentric circles, each divided into segments marked with notches and astronomical symbols. Your team initially interpreted it as a primitive calendar. Then a mathematician noticed the ratios. The inner circle divides into 365 and a quarter segments, the solar year including leap day adjustment. The middle circle divides into 18 and 6/10 segments, the lunar nodal precession cycle that governs eclipses. The outer circle divides into 25,772 segments, the precession of the equinoxes, the full wobble of Earth's axis. These aren't separate calendars. They're integrated. The notches show where the cycles align, creating what astronomers call cardinal events, moments when multiple astronomical cycles synchronize. And here's what freezes your blood. The next cardinal alignment marked on that stone circle occurs in 2031, 5 years from now. They carved a warning for a specific date in our immediate future. What happens in 2031? The calendar doesn't specify, but the astronomical conditions are documented. That year marks a rare triple conjunction: solar maximum in the 11-year sunspot cycle, lunar nodal alignment that amplifies tidal forces, and perihelion solstice synchronization, where Earth's closest approach to the Sun coincides with the winter solstice. Individually, these events are unremarkable. Combined, they create systemic stress on climate systems. Increased solar radiation during a maximum activity sun, enhanced tidal forces on oceanic and crustal systems, perihelion alignment that concentrates seasonal effects. The ancient calendar isn't predicting mystical catastrophe. It's warning about measurable astrophysical conditions that stress every system on the planet simultaneously. They survived these conditions once. They're telling you, prepare, because it's coming again. And the systems you've built aren't engineered for this level of simultaneous stress. Layer 3 is technological blueprints preserved in formats that defy deterioration. You're excavating a sealed chamber in the Transantarctic Mountains. Inside are sheets of compressed mineral composite, thin layers of mica bonded with metallic oxides, creating a material that's fireproof, waterproof, and resistant to chemical degradation. The sheets are covered in technical diagrams, not artistic representations, engineering schematics with dimensional annotations, material specifications, and assembly sequences. You're looking at construction plans for technologies that shouldn't exist in prehistoric context. Water purification systems using sand filtration and solar evaporation with efficiency rates that match modern desalination plants. Geothermal heat extraction using principles that weren't rediscovered until the 1970s. Structural engineering for earthquake-resistant buildings using base isolation, a technique we only implemented after catastrophic failures taught us the hard way. But here's where it gets impossible. Some blueprints show devices you don't recognize: cylindrical chambers with spiral internal geometries and magnetic ore components. The annotations describe rotational dynamics and electromagnetic field generation. Your electrical engineers recognize the configuration. It's a primitive dynamo, a mechanical electricity generator. Except it's not primitive. The efficiency calculations inscribed on the margins show power output ratios that exceed early 20th century generators. They understood electromagnetism. They built devices to harness it. And they left complete instructions for reconstruction, ensuring any civilization that reached basic metallurgy and mathematics could rebuild their technology from scratch. The blueprints aren't relics. They're restart instructions. A civilization recovery manual written in universal technical language that transcends spoken words. Layer 4 is the most disturbing. Predictions about our civilization's timeline that match reality with accuracy that can't be coincidence. You're analyzing a stone tablet recovered from a Greenland site. The inscription uses a numerical notation system your team decoded last month. The sequence describes a timeline: catastrophic climate event, 12,800 years of recovery, emergence of agricultural civilization, development of metallurgy, invention of writing, construction of monumental architecture, discovery of electricity, splitting of the atom, and finally, glacial melt exposing ancient sites. Each phase is marked with astronomical alignments that allow precise dating. When you plot the timeline against human history, every single milestone matches. The agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, Bronze Age metallurgy 5,000 years ago, the Industrial Revolution 250 years ago, nuclear technology 80 years ago, and glacial site exposure in our current decade. They didn't just predict these events, they predicted the sequence and the timing. How? Because they'd seen it before. Not these specific civilizations, but the pattern, the cycle. Climate stabilizes after glacial maximum. Population expands. Agriculture develops. Technology progresses. Energy consumption increases. Climate destabilizes. Glaciers melt. Crisis arrives. And here's the message carved in the final section of the tablet, translated from their mathematical notation into English. When the ice reveals us, you have one generation to choose a different outcome. The timeline they inscribed shows two paths forward from our current point. Path 1. Ignore the warnings. Continue accelerating consumption. Trigger cascading system failures within 50 years. Path 2. Implement the protocols encoded in the blueprints. Restructure energy systems using their preserved technology, and navigate the transition with manageable disruption instead of civilizational collapse. You're standing at the convergence point of 12,000 years of calculated preparation. They survived the catastrophe. They preserved the knowledge. They timed the message to arrive exactly when we'd need it. The directional markers led you to the sites. The calendrical warnings showed you when the next crisis window opens. The technological blueprints gave you alternatives to fossil fuel dependency. And the timeline predictions proved they understood the cycle well enough to forecast our arrival at this exact moment. Every layer of the communication system is active right now. The messages are decoding. The warnings are clear. The instructions are available. The only question remaining is, will we implement them, or will we ignore them and repeat the cycle? Chapter 5 reveals the most disturbing possibility, that the cycle isn't accidental, that these ancient civilizations didn't just survive catastrophe, they engineered it as a species-level filter. And the test isn't whether we find their messages. It's whether we prove ourselves worthy of the knowledge by choosing to act on it. Imagine this. Your excavation team just breached the final sealed chamber in the Antarctic subglacial complex. The room has been locked under 3 miles of ice for 12,800 years, protected by thermal systems that maintained precise preservation conditions throughout the entire glacial period. The chamber contains artifacts that shouldn't exist: crystalline storage devices with internal lattice structures designed to encode information at the molecular level, metallic alloys that don't corrode despite millennia of exposure, and in the center of the room, a stone pedestal supporting a single tablet inscribed with mathematical notation so dense it takes your cryptography team 6 weeks to decode the first line. When they finally translate it, the message destroys every assumption you've built over 4 chapters of investigation. It reads, "If you are reading this, you have failed the first test. The melt was not inevitable, it was conditional, and you triggered it. Let me walk you through the impossible truth carved into that tablet. The glacial melt happening right now, the retreating ice sheets, the exposed archaeological sites, the climate crisis dominating every political conversation, isn't random environmental degradation. It's a programmed response. The ancient civilization didn't just predict when the ice would melt. They engineered a system that would only initiate the melt when specific conditions were met by the inheriting civilization. Those conditions are written in the tablet with brutal clarity. Atmospheric carbon dioxide exceeding 400 parts per million, average global temperature increase exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial baseline, oceanic acidification crossing pH threshold of 8.05, and deforestation exceeding 40% of primary forest coverage. You're reading a list of trigger conditions, metrics that measure whether a civilization has achieved technology without achieving wisdom. And every single threshold has been crossed in the last 50 years. Here's where it gets darker. The tablet describes the mechanism: a distributed network of thermal regulation systems buried beneath ice sheets worldwide, powered by geothermal energy and designed to operate autonomously for tens of thousands of years. Under normal glacial conditions, these systems maintain stable ice coverage by managing heat distribution and preventing runaway melt. But when atmospheric sensors, yes, atmospheric sensors built 12,000 years ago, detect the trigger conditions, the systems reverse function. Instead of stabilizing the ice, they accelerate the melt. They're creating the crisis, intentionally. The technology is staggering: self-powered monitoring systems that operate for millennia, distributed processing that doesn't require central coordination, and thermal engineering that can manipulate continental-scale ice sheets. But the purpose is even more staggering. It's a filter. A species-level intelligence test built into the planet itself. You're asking, why would they do this? Why engineer a catastrophe for civilizations that develop technology without wisdom? The answer is in the second section of the tablet, and it's written with the cold logic of evolutionary mathematics. Civilizations follow predictable development curves. Tool use leads to agriculture. Agriculture leads to cities. Cities lead to specialization. Specialization leads to technology. Technology leads to energy exploitation. Energy exploitation leads to atmospheric alteration. At this point, the curve splits. Path 1. The civilization recognizes the danger, restructures energy systems, implements sustainable technology, and stabilizes. Path 2. The civilization prioritizes short-term gains, ignores warnings, accelerates consumption, and triggers cascading environmental collapse. Path 1. Civilizations survive and continue developing. Path 2. Civilizations collapse and reset to pre-technological states. The ancient builders survived a path to collapse. They knew what was coming because they'd caused it themselves and barely survived the consequences. But here's the choice they faced. Let future civilizations repeat the mistake and suffer the same collapse, or build a system that forces the lesson before it's too late. They chose option 3, something more calculated. They engineered the melt to serve as a warning system with built-in consequences. If a civilization develops technology responsibly, the trigger conditions never activate. The ice remains stable, and the ancient sites stay buried. The civilization continues developing without needing the archived knowledge because they're not making the same mistakes. But if a civilization follows path 2, if they burn fossil fuels recklessly, if they prioritize growth over stability, if they ignore atmospheric data, the system activates. The ice melts, the sites are exposed, and the civilization faces a forced choice. Acknowledge the crisis, implement the solutions preserved in the ancient blueprints, and survive the transition. Or ignore the warnings, continue the destructive trajectory, and collapse completely. The tablet describes this as the moral threshold test. Technology alone doesn't qualify a species for survival. Technological species that lack cooperative decision-making, that can't subordinate individual gain to collective survival, that prioritize quarterly profits over generational stability. Those species don't survive contact with planetary-scale engineering. They self-destruct. The melt isn't punishment. It's diagnosis. If you're triggering the melt, you're exhibiting the same pathological behaviors that destroyed the previous advanced civilization. And the ancient builders decided that species exhibiting those behaviors don't deserve to inherit advanced knowledge. They get one chance. Recognize the crisis, decode the warnings, implement the archived solutions, and prove you can make collective decisions that prioritize long-term survival. Pass the test, and the knowledge transfers. Fail it, and you collapse back to subsistence level. And the cycle resets for the next civilization to attempt. You're standing in that chamber, reading a message from people who died 12,000 years ago, and they're telling you that everything happening right now, the climate conferences, the carbon debates, the political fights over environmental policy, is the test. The question isn't whether glaciers melt. They're melting by design. The question is, what do you do about it? Do you implement the geothermal systems they blueprinted, the sustainable architecture they encoded, the energy technologies they preserved? Or do you continue arguing about economic impacts while the ice disappears and takes your coastal cities with it? They're watching. Not literally, they're dead. But their system is watching. The thermal networks beneath the ice are measuring your atmospheric output. The timeline they calculated is playing out in real time, and the final section of the tablet describes what happens if you fail. If atmospheric conditions continue deteriorating past the trigger thresholds, if the civilization doesn't course correct within one generation of exposure to the ancient sites, the thermal systems enter terminal phase. They don't just accelerate melt, they destabilize ice sheet foundations, triggering rapid sea level rise of 15 to 20 meters within 50 years. Not gradual coastal erosion, catastrophic inundation that drowns every major population center built near oceans. Simultaneously, the disrupted thermohaline circulation, the ocean current systems that regulate global climate, collapses, throwing regional climates into chaos. Agricultural zones become deserts. Temperate regions experience temperature swings of 40 degrees Celsius between seasons. And here's the cruelest part. The ancient builders could have prevented this. They had the technology to build stabilization systems instead of destabilization systems. They chose destabilization deliberately. Because a species that can't cooperate to solve an obvious crisis doesn't deserve planetary-scale technology. They get filtered out. The Earth resets. And in another 12,000 years, the next intelligent species gets their turn to attempt the test. You're reading this script right now, and you're part of the test. Not metaphorically, literally. The information exists. The warnings are decoded. The solutions are available in those ancient blueprints being excavated from the ice. Geothermal energy systems that could replace fossil fuel dependency. Architectural designs that survive climate instability. Agricultural techniques that work in altered rainfall patterns. Everything needed to navigate the transition is there, preserved in stone and mineral composites, waiting for implementation. The question is, will your civilization act on it? Will you subordinate short-term economic concerns to long-term survival? Will you cooperate across political boundaries to implement solutions that benefit the species rather than individual nations? Or will you continue the pattern, denial, delay, incremental half measures that triggers the terminal phase? The ancient civilization left one final message carved below the technical specifications. It's not a threat. It's not a plea. It's a statement of evolutionary mathematics written with the certainty of people who survived this exact crisis and built a 12,000-year time capsule to give their descendants one chance to avoid repeating it. The message is simple. Intelligence without wisdom is self-limiting. Technology without cooperation is self-destructive. You have the tools, you have the warnings, you have one generation to prove you're different from the species-level pattern that filters 99% of technological civilizations into extinction. The ice is melting, the sites are exposed, the test is active, and the only question that matters, the question that determines whether human civilization continues or collapses, is whether you're capable of passing it. The clock is counting. The thermal systems are measuring, and the civilization beneath the ice is waiting to see if you deserve to inherit what they preserved. What happens next depends entirely on what you choose to do right now.